right now, and I know that
Let's
we've
get
got
started.
a
You're on. Yep.
full agenda.
We're recording. You're on.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jamie with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. Welcome, everybody, to our fourth Tuesday of the month meeting. And we're going to be going through the architecture of surveillance and data-driven policing, our different strategies to dismantle these programs, different ways that we're building power in the community, and the different things that working groups are engaged in. So before I do that, I just want to let folks know different ways that they can engage in the Zoom. We do have everybody muted right now. That's just to kind of help the flow, kind of keeping ourselves and each other safe. Sometimes there's Zoom bombing. So this is one way that we try to help keep everybody safe. So one other thing I wanted to say, that if you do have any questions or comments, that you can go ahead and hold on one second, my computer got all messed up. You can go ahead and use the comment box, the chat box at the bottom of the screen. If you have questions anytime during the sharing of the work, go ahead and use the chat box. If you want to and you know how to, you can raise your hand. We have folks that will be looking in the different participant area to see if folks have their hands raised. You can also, if you're on the phone, you can dial in and you can call 562-230-4578, and we can take your question there as well. So so I definitely encourage folks to ask questions. This is the time where we folks that have been, deep in the working groups really want to share what we've been doing and get community feedback. So right now, your voice, what you think, what direction we should be going is super important as we craft this work, because we take that back, we reflect on it, we integrate it. So let's get started. So basically we're kind of restructuring right now in the coalition, because after the dismantling of Predpol and Laser, LAPD responded by creating a program called Data-Informed Community-Focused Policing. So as they created this new program, we realized that we also had to restructure our strategy and go about this, this task and this goal of dismantling all state-sanctioned surveillance in a different way as well. So what we've done is we've decided we wanted to build power in 3 different ways in these new working groups. We wanted to go after and dismantle the architecture of surveillance. And there's different work that we're doing around that strategy of not only uncovering what other tools and equipment, surveillance equipment they're using, but also analyzing and deciding how we want to go about dismantling that. We also have a team of people who are looking at older PRA around the dismantled Operation Laser program, and we've been analyzing all the thousands, and I mean thousands of maps that we've been getting from LAPD through the public records request, and we've been remapping them, and we've been looking at different components and seeing what this impact of this program was on our community, as well as starting to have conversations around location-based policing. What is it? What does it mean to have land policed? And what different ways does it show up? So not only showing up in the violence that we experience on our bodies, that we see, but also as a form of violence, on our homes by evictions, the use of the citywide nuisance abatement program. So that group is also bringing that into the space. And lastly, all of this also targeting this new program, Data-Informed Community-Focused Policing. So what I'm saying is a lot, and we're going to go through a lot of that today. So like I said, asking questions, taking notes, slowing us down, that's all very necessary. But to hold all this work, we've decided that this working group is going to meet the first and third Mondays of the month at 6 p.m. So throughout, as we're talking, I'm going to keep letting folks know that if something is interesting to you, you feel like you can contribute to that, you want to be a part of this fight, send us your email in the chat, text your email. Again, the number is 562-230-4578. Let us know that you want to join. yeah, so let's get into what these working groups have been doing. And there's a few of us that are going to be presenting. It's not going to be me just speaking the whole time, but I wanted to start with the most central component of this fight. Everything that surveillance is about, everything that we need to know about surveillance, because it's how, excuse me, it's how tools are deployed that we really need to know what these tools are, because these are the tools that are infiltrating our community. So I'm going to share my screen right now and start with a PowerPoint to kind of take us through. Hold on one second. Love all this tech. Excuse me, take us through the different types of surveillance technology. And this is a pop-ed tool that we've used. It's called the Architecture of Surveillance. And this was developed, I think almost 7-8 years ago in the coalition, and actually happened in a working group and in a meeting like this, where we kind of started to list and kind of see all the various types of surveillance technology that LAPD was using. And within that, knowing that data collection, racial profiling, knowing that different policing strategies and tactics, like I said about data-informed community-focused policing, LAPD's new predictive policing program was dependent on the architecture of surveillance. And then at the same time, realizing there's massive amounts of corporate profit that go into surveillance technology. Similar to the military, it just becomes a money-making machine. And as you know, we're having these conversations around the budget, we're realizing that this is purely a budget that keeps growing and growing and growing, and there are tons of industries that are making money off of this. So what is some of this technology? Well, we've received documentation and we know that digital receiver technology, or also known as dirt boxes, are being used by LAPD. Now this technology can essentially unencrypt your phone and take data from your phone. So, all this encryption, protection that we think we have, we know for a fact that this technology is able to kind of push past that. There's technology like Stingray, and Stingray is similar to the dirt box, but cannot do that unencrypting, but basically tricks your phone into thinking it's a cell tower so that it can gather data from your phone as well. We have Trapwire. Now, for those of you who were at the federal building on Sunday, and I'm pretty positive the Trapwire was there, but if you looked up, right, at the federal building and you looked all the way to the top, you could see that there was these black little bulbs kind of hanging off the side of the building. And the capacity for this, camera can basically see all the way to the ground. Because I will speak about another surveillance tactic they use called suspicious activity reporting program. But Trapwire essentially is real-time feed where they can actually open up secret files on you for suspicious behavior while someone is watching the feed, right? They'll just get your description, your location, your photograph, and kind of start to collect data on you. This is high definition camera, of course, collecting more video footage, imagery of people. These are automatic license plate readers. We'll talk later about the dismantled Operation Laser program, but the automatic license plate readers were very crucial to that program. And so basically, these are set up throughout the community. People drive by and basically they pick up your license plate. If you notice, a lot of malls now and universities have automatic license plate readers. When you enter in, you get a little, you print out a ticket and it has your license plate number on it already. So the monitoring of where you're at is also becoming very normalized in the private sector as well. And then here we have drones. LAPD acquired different drones. The Stop LAPD Spying was actually able to get these drones destroyed through our organizing. They were actually destroyed by LAPD, but they did, against all efforts and opposition from the community, did acquire drones recently in I think the last 1.5 or 2 years. Body cameras. Now, when body cameras first came out, they were basically a tool that people thought would bring police accountability. but we know for a fact that body camera footage now is being used to train algorithms to detect people's movement as being aggressive or passive. So this is where a tool of surveillance is being used to not only program, more predictive analytics, but used to gather more data on us. Freedom on the move, this was actually seen during the George Floyd uprising in the very early first few days. This was seen in downtown, and this is another image. And so this one is able to take footage from, miles away of the crowd. And again, getting faces, picking up who's there in the crowd, what you're carrying, what you're wearing, any kind of identifying markers. And then last, I wanted to end on suspicious activity reporting. Now, this is the surveillance kind of tactic that launched the coalition. Our main fight that we started in 2011 was against the suspicious activity reporting program. Now, what's so key to this program and understanding how this surveillance technology really is essential to every program that LAPD runs now is because it's really about behavioral surveillance and data mining. So you need the architecture of surveillance to collect the data, right? So that they can pull data together, and with all this data they collect, they can predict if you are going to do something, right? And that's where we get the predictive analytics, where you get PredPol, or you get the person-based predictive policing programs. And so suspicion, as defined by the Office of Director of National Intelligence, is defined as observed behavior reasonably indicative of pre-operational planning of criminal or terrorist activity, right? So observed behavior, so you're just being watched, pre-operational planning, that you are thinking about doing something. And we spoke about reasonable indication, which is an articulatable concern. So no more probable cause or reasonable suspicion. Now they can just articulate a concern that, that you're thinking about doing something. So this is essentially the basis for all predictive analytics, right? This hunch-based presumptive policing, which has always existed, but what's happening now is it's becoming solidified and kind of, what's the word, like made legal, because we all know that driving while black was predictive policing, but now they're kind of setting up this pseudoscience and this pseudo, ideology that this is actually a reality, that you can actually watch people and gather data and predict who they are. So, so I wanted to share a little bit about how we are building power around the architecture of surveillance, right? Not so much around it, but how we're trying to dismantle it. So another thing that we have done is not only have we learned about the different components of the architecture of surveillance, we know that there's more. So we are like in this working group, we're really in the midst of building that power, building that knowledge. And one of the things that the coalition often says is you have to know your fight, to be able to, dismantle and to know your power. So, and we often say too, we want to build power, not paranoia, because in this kind of knowledge gathering phase, sometimes it becomes very overwhelming to know everything that exists. So what we've done, and I'm going to go back to screen sharing, is what we did is recently, I think, what was this, has a date on it, it should, yeah, at the end of last year, the coalition decided that we needed to know more about the architecture of surveillance. We needed to know more of what was out there. So a public records request was used. And again, part of this working group is finding ways to use multiple tactics to build power, to not only increase our knowledge so we can share knowledge, but to also engage LAPD in various ways. So it's almost like they have nowhere to run. And so this is a legal avenue. But one thing that's very clear about the coalition is that all of this is grassroots, community-based. We do the work. We only engage lawyers when we absolutely have to. So this is a legal strategy in a sense, but it's completely in the hands of the community. This PRA, for example, was written by community members. And now all the documents that we're starting to receive are actually being worked through by the working groups that are meeting the first Monday and the third Monday of the month. So we're not, enlisting lawyers per se and, asking them to do pro bono work and to kind of help us understand what this all is. Part of the journey with the coalition is like getting down and dirty and understanding this technology ourselves. Another way, just to kind of throw a pitch out there, this Thursday, we're going to be having another teach-in around surveillance technology, so that as you become more interested and if you want to know more or you want to participate more in the coalition, we are providing avenues and ways for us to kind of get, the basics down, so that when you do engage in kind of a deep dive process like this, you have like a foundation of what you're looking at. Because, so this is the PRA, and I just wanted to finish kind of slowly scrolling through it. And that's it. And these are the documents that we have received. So these are some of the documents. We can see there's body cam documents here, some more body cam documents. We have cell communication, interception here. There's documents around Palantir, which I'm sure some folks are familiar with. It's a data analytical kind of tool where they can bring multiple databases together to kind of create mission sheets, to create composites of people. So this working group is now in the process, and where we're at right now is that we're cataloging a lot. So we're trying to go through all the documents to figure out what is here. Here's some more information around drones right here, you can see, and create folders, so that we can bring documents that are similar all together. Here's the digital receiver technology that I was talking about, digital recording technology, sorry about that. So the dirt boxes, so we know that's there. So intelligence gathering guidelines, this is how groups are infiltrated. Basically, it takes one tip and a police officer can enter a group and start gathering information on people. They don't even have to have a cause. It can just be a random phone call to LAPD saying, I think this group is doing something suspicious. So, so again, I'm going to stop sharing right now. This is the work that part of this kind of working group is doing. And what's so important is that, as we start to think about the technology, we start thinking about the location, where this technology is being placed, how it's policing, but then we think about things programmatically, right? So one last thing I wanted to show, and then I wanted to, well, let's see. No, I think I'm going to stop there. So I wanted to check in with folks if there was any questions that anybody had around thinking about the architecture of surveillance, around the working group that is going through the public records request, around, we definitely want your input. If there's input you have in how to organize this. We had a phone call yesterday kind of thinking to ourselves, how do we start to make sense of all these documents, because there are so many. And right now we're in the process of putting them into buckets. And so again, if you want to join this this team, we meet the first Monday, the third Monday of the month at 6 p.m. We meet on Zoom, we do our work at home. So is there any questions or comments that folks have right now, or experiences they want to share around public records requests?
I think Stephen has a comment. Let me just see if I can unmute them. Go ahead, Stephen, you had a comment about the JTTF and fusion centers. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. I'll put my screen on also. You guys are the experts on it, and I am completely impressed by the work and the diligence you have done. The only comment I made is it's not necessarily the data per se, it's analysis, the fusion centers and all that. And I know you guys have talked about it on how they're trying to decentralize the fusion centers, make them more community-based. There are major liabilities within that construct, and that was my only point there. But it's a minor issue. Again, you guys are doing remarkable work. Thank you.
Can I just quickly respond to that, Jamie?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So the Fusion Center, Stephen, thank you for lifting it. So we did get their updated and amended contract of the Fusion Center, the Los Angeles. So for folks who don't know, it's like a central hub and spoke of that, literally a spy center. And we've had 2 successful actions for temporarily shutting it down back in 2012 and early 2013. So yeah, so there's a whole bunch of stuff that is also coming out, but I think it's a good point that at some point for us to circle back. And Stephen, if you're interested, maybe we can do some sort of a conversation as to how do we hit them back? And yeah, so thank you, Jamie.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about fusion centers and kind of how they're a model for locally based fusion centers that are, as LAPD breaks us up into 21 divisions, according to their strategic way of containing and controlling us, they're putting these mini fusion centers per division now. So, so now I wanted to kind of shift, if there was no more questions, I wanted to shift into the other section of this group, which is the location-based policing and the mapping project that we're doing. So I'm going to screen share again because I wanted to share a little bit about, I'll get to what my about sharing is in a second. Okay, let's see. Okay, so so like I was saying, Stop LAPD Spying recently was able to dismantle Operation Laser and Predpol. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Operation Laser, and it stands for LA Strategic Extraction and Restoration. So basically a laser zone, and you can see it right here. This was some art that was done by a coalition member. And basically they take gun violence data, any type of, shots fired, 911 calls, arrests with gun, any kind of crime that they can catalog that's associated to a gun. And they use ArcGIS basically to create these density maps where they feel like gun violence is happening on a large level, right? And so they create these little boxes called laser zones. And within these laser zones, they patrol, and Metro and gang enforcement detail are often sent to these laser zones. They use the automatic license plate readers. Field interview cards are very much at play here, being able to card as many people as possible. And they were also looking for people they called chronic offenders in these areas. So, so laser zones were created throughout Los Angeles, right? And so within these laser zones, there were also something called anchor points. Now, anchor points were these kind of micro hotspots, right? And they could be houses, they could be businesses, they could be intersections, they could be apartment complexes. And basically, again, they would use some type of crime data. And this is where, when we finally exposed these programs, we started to find out that LAPD was actually making it up, kind of just creating anchor points where they wanted to, creating laser zones where they wanted to. There was really no rhyme or reason as to how they even came up with identifying areas. But the interesting thing, and this is where we start thinking about land and how land gets policed, where the violence of policing is not just on our bodies, but it's also on the land and the changing of the land and the grooming of the land to make it easier policed, and the removal of people off land, right? So they don't just incarcerate us or murder us, but they find a way to actually remove us off the land as well. And of course, this is not a moment in time, this has been happening, but this is how it's currently showing up through, the avenues of pseudoscience and, again, pseudo ideologies that legitimize these practices. And that's why it's so important for us to stay, in pace with these different tactics. So anchor points would basically, once they identified an anchor point, they would try to restructure the landscape. They would try to evict tenants, business owners, by engaging with the city attorney. And the city attorney would use programs like the nuisance abatement program, the citywide nuisance abatement program, to actually remove people from these areas. So in this work, in part of this other component of the working group, and again, we meet the first Monday and third Monday of the month at 6 p.m. We're kind of looking at location-based policing. How is it, what are the new tactics that are being used to police land? We're also looking at and building with other housing rights organizers, because part of anchor points and using the nuisance abatement and using the evictions is that what we're finding, and what we were suspicious of already, is that they were trying to remove people off of land they want to redevelop. So not only is it kind of like, this form of terrorizing us so that we are, remove ourselves physically off the land, they find ways to engage with city officials to remove us from the land. So I'm going to stop screen sharing, and I'm going to invite Amy to show us a little bit about, and so before I end, I want to say that we're going to be looking at some maps right now, and these maps that we looked at were also a part of a public records request that the coalition filed on Operation Laser, looking to see how did they design the laser? What was the policy and procedure to design the laser zones? Where were the anchor points? We asked for any and all of everything in regards to this mapping program or this predictive policing program. So what you're going to see are some of the maps that we created. And so I'm going to pass it to Amy. And
hello, can everyone?
Yes.
Hi, so my name is Amy, she, they pronouns, and I actually also organize with Chinatown Community for Equitable Development, CCED, which is like a tenant housing justice organization based in Chinatown. And like Jamie was saying, a lot of these issues of land and gentrification and redevelopment is something that we also fight for in Chinatown. And so our causes are very intimately linked. And so just what I'm going to be showing you really quickly is just some maps that we made of the anchor points that we found out of the Public Records Act request that we had made earlier. And so I could probably just start sharing like this. Okay, great. So what we're looking at right now, and as Jamie had mentioned, the LAPD kind of splits all these neighborhoods and all these, they have a series of divisions that they kind of categorize these communities and neighborhoods by, and that's where they do a lot of their creation of the anchor points and just I think a lot of their analysis. And so what I'm showing right now is all the anchor points that we found in the 77th division, which is kind of the Crenshaw and the Slauson areas you see here. And so just like Jimmy had mentioned, anchor points can be businesses, can be residences, can also be intersections. And so with the data that we had gotten out of this, we were able to sort of categorize all the points here by whether they were an intersection, a business, or an intersection and a business. And so we just have some of them here. But what's also very notable is that one of the anchor points that they had here was Nipsey Hussle's store, Marathon. And so that was very clear, where it was very much a hub of community, and yet this is one that the LAPD had kind of signified was potentially this source of violence. So that was just demonstrating, I think, the 77th division. The other one that I wanted to demonstrate or show was just the Central Division, which is more downtown. And so just like I was saying before, unfortunately the data we had for this one didn't necessarily have the categorizations between whether they had selected building or intersection. But even then, we're still able to get some information out of all the anchor points that we found here. And specifically, if we look at both Spring Street and 5th Street and Maple Street and 7th Street, these 2 points right here goes back to, I think, a lot of the things that I just mentioned and that Jamie had mentioned about land and development and how intimately those two things are tied. Because with both of these, specifically the Maple and the 7th is now the site of the 33-story luxury development that's happening, I think, very close to the Fashion District, and I think very close to Skid Row. And so it kind of speaks to the fact that LAPD is really thinking about these areas as now they're just continuously encroaching on places where places like Skid Row, and that LAPD has now targeted these specific anchor points as areas that they need to very much surveil, because the land has now become valuable to them, valuable to development and to like gentrifiers that might be coming into the community. That was the Maple and 7th one, but there's also the Spring and 5th one that is highlighted a little above, which used to be a single residence occupancy building. So it used to be like a lower income, supposed to be like an affordable housing building that would have a lot of like single room occupancy units, but has since, I think, when Jamie and I were looking it up today, was like late 2000s, was redeveloped into a mixed use development, not mixed use, but that had market rate housing in addition to like some affordable housing units, but really like, I'm an urban planner by, I think, education. So it's something that we've learned consistently is like, even if like units are supposed to be affordable, they're not really affordable, because like the way that they are calculated is like by, not necessarily by like how much. Anyways, the way that they're calculated doesn't always mean that they're actually affordable. It's just like what it is comparatively to the rest of the area around it. So that's just like 2 points that we wanted to highlight. And then something that we had also mapped out to was kind of these predpol areas. And so we can see, I think a lot of what was mentioned before, kind of like where these points are scattered around Los Angeles. And when we layer the two with like the predpol points, and I think the anchor points, oh, I think I put the same one. Okay, we layer them out here. When we were looking at this a little bit earlier in the day, we were really noticing that it seemed like there was this like desire to, I think, like clear out kind of this downtown area. And we can see where kind of the anchor points are in the central division that I had mentioned before, where it really seems like all the anchor points are in spaces where like they're specifically like trying to, like LAPD is like trying to clear out and such. And so it's just being able to like map all these specific points out and be able to see them visually, I think has been able to help us kind of identify and think through what is happening, you know, with this architecture of surveillance. So Jamie, did I miss anything?
Yeah, no, this is great. And right here, one thing I wanted to show, if Amy, you can show where downtown is with the red boxes are the anchor points right there. But this spot just north, I don't know if it's just north, but you see these, let's see, if you could show where Skid Row is at. Skid Row's down towards the bottom, and you see this white spot towards the bottom.
Is it zooming in, or is it only on my screen?
Yeah, it's zooming in, yeah.
Okay.
And then if you go down like just below, yeah, you see this like kind of white space to the left of the screen. And what's interesting is that's the quarantining that is happening around Skid Row. So we know Skid Row to be highly policed. And in fact, in some of these documents that we received, they refer to the anchor points as outside of the reset zones. And reset was just the continuation of the Safer Cities initiative, where they infiltrated and placed, you know, I think 50 extra additional officers just to the area of Skid Row. So we know that that tunnel area where it seems blank and that there's nothing there, but it's surrounded by predpol hotspots. So predpol started to be used to actually quarantine Skid Row to make sure no one was crossing over into the downtown area where we see all the red boxes that are anchor points. And Reset was responsible for making sure that, you know, Skid Row was still being policed. So this is why it's so important to kind of show these programs in conjunction, because they are using them to, in a sense, how do I say, like, amplify the containing and the controlling and the criminalizing, right? So, and then if we look into downtown, I thought one thing that was very interesting is that it's really a clearing out. When we think about where Main Street was, that's where Los Angeles Community Action Network used to be, was on Main Street. And we got, you know, basically the building was sold, and now there's a parking structure next to a high-rise building of residency, like, you know, luxury lofts. When we think about the Alexandria, which Amy was speaking about, that space used to be a place where, you know, that was low income, single residency occupancy. And now I think affordable rent is somewhere near $1,000, right? Which is not affordable to the community that used to live there. So, so I think that's good. And I wanted to stop right here to see, and maybe if we want to keep this, the maps up, if anybody had any questions or comments. I saw a couple pop up, so I wanted to, yeah, that's a good one to leave it on. I wanted to get to these, and I think Marta said, where can we find info about teach-in on Thursday? Okay, didn't see on the website or Facebook. Hamid, did you want to say where we can find the teach-in this Thursday?
That's actually a super secret, and no, I'm just kidding. So it's going to be going up on the. It's already on social media. Was posted on Facebook, but it should be going up on our website, or I believe it is on our website. But what I'll do is, Marta, let me just look up our website. It definitely is going to be up there tomorrow, so it requires a registration, and we're going to send it your way, and I'll post it on the chat.
So, and then there's another question from Greg. I was wondering if your group was going through the Blue Link hack documents that were released last month, docs from a Fusion Center contractor. Did you want to, can we unmute Greg? Maybe you can share a little bit more with us, Greg, about this.
Hold on a second. So let me just get to them. Yeah, Greg, they already, actually that whole thing was taken off, but go ahead and unmute yourself, and if you have a comment.
I was wondering, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure if I moved myself. I'm doing requests on the Long Beach police that mimic a lot of yours, so that's mainly why I'm here. But I was wondering mainly if you guys had gone through those and if there was stuff related to our Fusion Center in them, if you had.
Yes.
I saw they weren't searchable by the time I got them. And
yeah, that's what happened.
It's hard to download.
Yeah, that's what happened. And actually, and we are still trying to locate. And I know a couple people have indicated that we may be able to. So we'll see. But going back to the Surveillance 101, actually, we are doing that also coordinating with the Long Beach Black Lives Matter group as well. And I know that if you're looking to file public records, we're also in the process of doing that too. So maybe we can talk at some point as well. And that was for Long Beach.
Oh yeah, I have about 20 in with them right now. So
awesome. Great,
Okay.
thank you.
And then we had another question from Sunshine, and this is a really great question. And says, do the darker circles mean something different than the other circles? So when you look at where the darker circles are, that is it's a repetitive predpol hotspot. So the darker the circle is, the more frequent LAPD basically chose that as a hotspot. Now, if you look kind of towards the bottom of where the red boxes are, you'll see 4 red boxes. If you just go up above those red boxes, those dark circles are all along Los Angeles Street. And what's interesting is that we also had this same map duplicated for 2015. And along Los Angeles Street, you see the dark boxes again. And so that's when we started to identify that there was actually the quarantining. So they were repeating the dark boxes along Los Angeles Street as well. So, so again, this is demonstrating to us that not only are they building surveillance technologies to gather data on us, but they're also using that same technology, you know, and using crime data, you know, to basically map and segment off land, and to basically, you know, map the territory of the land. So not only are they knowing us, but they're becoming more powerful at marking geography and mapping geography. So, so did anybody else have any other questions or wanted to look at any of the other maps before we move on? And if you're also interested in being a part of this process, and if you're a mapper, and I'm not a mapper, so I'm calling them mappers because I'm sure there's another way to refer to it. But if you have experience in doing this kind of work, basically working with maps and working with data, and you want to start, you know, going through these PRAs yourself and looking at them, again, please email us and let us know how you want to join. We meet, the working group will meet the first Monday and the third Monday of the month at 6 p.m. And this fourth Tuesday will always come back to the community. So if you're not able to meet with us on Monday, that first Monday and that third Monday, there will always be this fourth Tuesday where we come and we talk and we basically show and what we're doing, because it's really important, again, like I say, that we not only work and internally and we kind of have these discussions, but that we share this knowledge and we get feedback and we get instruction and we get guidance, because this is, you know, this is a coalition, this is a team effort. So we can't say that we know everything that we're supposed to be doing, and we're really about building community power, community knowledge, and that collective effort and spirit, because it's going to take that to be able to dismantle these programs. And for example, these programs, Predpol and Operation Laser, were dismantled because of this work that we were doing. But now, because the Police Commission chose to just sweep it under the rug and not look at the impact, we are doing this work of looking at the impact and kind of uncovering what is going on. And why that's so important is because now they've rebranded themselves and come out with a new strategy. And that's the strategy of data-informed, community-focused policing. So does anybody, I'm going to just say it one more time, if anybody has any more questions or comments or wants to look at any other map. And if not, we can go ahead. And Amy, thank you so much. Amy put a lot of work into this as well. So I really want to thank you for all of that. Super helpful for us to, you know, to be understanding and visually seeing what this is. A lot of times when we would show people where the laser zones were at, especially if it was in their community, they would be like, I know what's going on there. I know who lives there. I know what building used to exist there. So it's a very kind of triggering moment where people kind of start to relate to the space as well as being their home and seeing how their home is being targeted. So like I said, the importance of bringing under the understanding of all the technology, looking at how land is being kind of cut up is important, because it's informing us, this practice and this study is informing us, because we want to go after data-informed, community-focused policing. So I'm going to screen share again, and I want to show, if I can get to it. Okay, let's see. I want to show what data-informed, community-focused policing is. So I'm going to scroll up. Don't want to make anybody dizzy. Okay, so after we dismantled Operation Laser and Predpol, LAPD, you know, realized, like, shoot, they're on to us. We're just running these programs however we want to. They couldn't even audit Predpol because the data and their way of, you know, keeping metrics was completely off. They had nothing they can work with. Laser, it was exposed that they were, you know, putting random people on lists, not even using the risk assessment they were supposed to be doing. They had no standardized way that they were, you know, creating laser zones. They were creating and just picking anchor points at whim. So all of this was exposed, and essentially the programs were dismantled. So they came back with a new program called Data-Informed, Community-Focused Policing. And so basically, as I like to frame it, is that they just threw the kitchen sink at us. They said, you know, we're going to do our new Data-Informed Policing program is going to be everything you can think of. And so I want to focus in on, and I was really glad that this came up, I wanted to focus in on just a couple portions of it, because this handbook is 27 pages long, and we're not going to be able to get to all of it. But what I wanted to show was where they do the data analytics. And here you can see right now, or let me scroll up a little bit. These are how all this right here. You'll see the 21 divisions are here. This is 21, you know, the last one. And each of these are the different bureau. So you have Central Bureau, South Bureau. You have Valley Bureau, West Bureau here, and Valley Bureau here. And within each of those, they have divisions, which they're now calling areas. So to keep that in mind, if you ever wanted to know what area you live in, what bureau you live in, and what's going on there. And the reason why that's really important, I think, for us to know that is, like Hamid had said, with the fusion centers, we actually organized and we shut down fusion centers. We were able to shut them down for a day, stop all business operations. They locked the doors. And these fusion centers are data analytics centers. And I'm gonna just kind of jump to, let's see, hold on real quick. I'm gonna jump to kind of talk a little bit about fusion centers. So there's probably 85 plus fusion centers nationwide, one of the largest ones here in Norwalk. And what they essentially do is, it's kind of like a huge warehouse of where data just comes flooding in from CCTVs, from the suspicious activity reporting program that I mentioned earlier on. And so basically, they are like these centers where information gets shared. When a suspicious activity report is written on you, right, and it goes through the vetting of LAPD, and it goes into the fusion center and gets vetted with the Joint Terrorism Task Force, it eventually gets uploaded into what's called the information sharing environment. And you may have heard the coalition talk about it as the stalker state, right? And what the information sharing environment does, it makes it shareable with 18,000 other law enforcement agencies. And so your SAR can follow you from state to state to state, from city to city to city, because the idea of sharing information is essential to LAPD. I'm also going to go back to this handbook, and I wanted to kind of scroll down a little bit, and I wanted to show how, like, I think like Stephen was saying, not only is it the gathering of data and that dependency on the architecture of surveillance, but it's the analysis of it, right? They need to be able to do something with all the data. So I'm going to get to the part, okay, let's see. Hold on one second. I want to get to the part of the handbook that talks about community safety operations centers and area crime and community intelligence centers. And I'm going to make it a little bit larger so that we can.
So Jamie, as you're looking for that real quickly, I just posted the link to Surveillance 101 teach-in on Thursday. So there's all the folks can go to that link, all the information to register and everything else is there.
So here you see that, you know, the implementations and operations. So here you see something called the Area Crime and Community Intelligence Centers. Now, when you get further into the handbook, they start saying, oh, this is something that we're using to build trust in the community. And they, you know, are so gross as even using the word community when they speak about the Area Crime and Community Intelligence Centers. Now, this is almost like a mini fusion center, which is how I like to describe them. And they are per area now, right? So when we thought about the fusion centers kind of being in larger parts of the state, kind of, you know, kind of being this national hub and spoke and sharing information, now they've brought that idea down to local community level, right? And they have one per area. So there's 21 of these. So not only when we think about budget, right? When we think about how technology is becoming more and more used in our communities, and the surveillance equipment is becoming more and more prevalent in communities, they have to be able to do something with that. And they have to create centers where they are using programs like Palantir, using things like the records management system to organize this information so they can operationalize it, right? So we won't kind of get into the different ways that they're operationalizing it because it's a lot of information. So again, I encourage you to come to the working groups where we're breaking all of this down. And each Tuesday, we'll go through different sections of it. But in the area crime and community intelligence centers, the data analytics happens. This is where they figure out, because they're still using hotspot policing, right? They figure out where the hotspots are going to be. They're still using person-based policing programs where they're still figuring out who they want to go after, right? And this all goes back to that predictability when I first talked about suspicious activity reporting and this hunch-based and presumptive policing, where now they feel like if I gather all this data and I analyze all this data, that legitimizes why I think this area is high crime and I need to patrol there. This is why I stalk and I track and I trace this person, because I have all this data on this person. That legitimizes my presumption and assumption that this person is going to commit a crime. So these are in our neighborhoods, right? Now, like I said, there's 4 bureaus. So they even have what's called the Community Safety Operations Centers, which now bring that information from the Area Crime and Community Intelligence Centers and be sure that the 4 bureaus are talking to each other, right? And so how is that information? They're making sure there's this endless stream of information that's going on. And this, essentially comes from not only, I don't want to just say it's post 9/11 kind of mentality. It's always been there around information sharing. But the point of the stalker state, or which is also called the information sharing environment, was that they wanted to get policing into the culture of being the eyes and the ears for the federal government. Like, so domestic law enforcement collects data and then gets used to and trains itself to share this data, to analyze this data so they can stop something from happening again. And their excuses like, so we can stop another 9/11. But one of the principles in the coalition is that we want to demystify the ideas of national security, right? And we want to demonstrate that this is really about the containing and controlling of our communities. This is really about the criminalization of the Black and Brown community. This is really about not only incarcerating us, murdering us, removing us from land. This has nothing to do with national security. This is, they may, have some kind of connections to it, make up some kind of stories that are going on. But when it comes down to it, this is why we have massive amounts of people in cages and why we're building this movement for, abolishing prisons and abolishing the police, because it's really about the criminalization of our people. So I wanted to stop right here to see if folks had any questions again, because we're going to go into another section of this of the data-informed community-focused policing program. But I wanted to stop again to see if anybody had any kind of questions about that, because I want to tell a story real quick. Is that I'm going to go to this, but this let me just hold on one second so I can make it big. So this is a community safety operations center. And this, you can see there's Maple and 6th Street. So we're in Central Division and we're in the community of Skid Row. And the coalition, just like we had the tradition of shutting down the fusion centers and exposing where the fusion centers were at, we also exposed where one of the community safety operations centers were at. Folks came with us. We marched along 6th Street. There were some of us that went ahead early before the large crowd came. We went into the police station. What's the name of this police station again, Hamid? Is it Central? Yeah. So Central Station. And we basically demanded to speak to the commanding officer. And we demanded that he come out and speak to the crowd. And we demanded that he tell us about the Community Safety Operations Center. And so while we were in there, they denied it. No, 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 it doesn't exist. No, 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 we don't have secret lists of people. No, 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 we don't do the data analytics. And when he even came out, he continued with that lie. But obviously, when we filed our public records request, when we forced for the ending of laser, we were able to expose that truly that was a community safety operations center. And so the secretness of it, the spying, the infiltration in our community is very real. We broke bread in front of the station. We had art on the walls that we projected, multimedia. We even lit a bonfire in front of the station where the fire department showed up, saw that it was a nice bonfire and actually left and didn't, intervene or even get involved with what we were doing. And it was a beautiful, powerful moment So when we think about, you know, what else we could be doing, I'm very interested in finding out where these area, the ACCIC's, Area Crime Community Intelligence Centers, you know, but so I just wanted to share that. But I see that we have
One
a couple
comment
questions.
here. Yeah, there's a comment from Stephen again that just about the clearly the legal cost is talking about that. One of the questions I have concerns the legal cost of living in these impacted areas, that how much money is taken from that community by over enforcing living crimes, fines, fees, probation, or diversion costs. The collective cost may be difficult to determine by zip code, but existing efforts at Court Watch may help, demonstrating the additional arbitrary costs that the state imposes to simply live in the neighborhood may also help in defining the problem. So absolutely, when you're constantly being ticketed, when you're constantly being, you know, just doing that, that mounts up. And on top of, you know, the asset forfeiture that these folks take away as well. So yeah, so that was one comment. That's all I have on this side, Jamie. I don't know if you have on the other side.
Let me see. I think I have to stop screen sharing to be able to see. So give me just
Okay.
one moment.
And Mike has
And
a
I have
question.
something. I
Okay.
have something here.
Go ahead, Mike. So here's a question.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. A thought just popped into my head. I'll try to articulate it. You know, I've been reading quite a bit about the Camden Model in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, as we're going over this brochure, I just realized that this brochure and the Camden Model are very similar. Has anybody looked at whether the people who are developing these two models are connected or
Talking
speaking
to each other? Yeah, actually, somebody, it's interesting you'd say that because we are working with them on something else. Professor Brandon McQuaid, he'd looked at the Camden Model. I mean, I'm glad you raised that because we're just working on something else. So that reminded us to hit him back and kind of just to see what his analysis is on the Camden Model. But it'll also be good to know. And for folks who don't know about the Camden Model, just the basic gist of that is that is being presented out of Camden, New Jersey, as a model of policing, where the community engagement and this and that, but it really comes back to a whole lot of containment and control under the guise of community participation and community control and things like that. So thank you, Mike, for raising that, and I think it'll be good for us to file some public records. Absolutely, as to what has been the communication. And Andrew, get to you in a second, Sophie. Andrew made a comment that it sounds like counterinsurgency to me, so absolutely. Go ahead, Sophie, unmute yourself.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, so Camden's policing initiative is called Safer Neighborhoods Through Precision Policing.
Right.
And this really long name that LAPD has assigned to their programs here, the data-informed, community-focused policing, is they actually explicitly said they're calling it this instead of precision policing so that people can't have a catchy name to go against. So LAPD is instating a form of precision policing, which is also what Camden used and also what New York has used, and a lot of different cities across the US. And they're just intentionally not calling it that. So just to also add some context.
Right.
Thank you.
So any other questions? Because I have one on this end, but I wanted to hold off on it real quick because it's going to pertain to something we're going to speak about next. And Vivan, I'm going to get to your question because we're actually going to talk about CSP right now. So like I said, Wednesday or not Wednesday, I'm going to get everybody confused. The first Monday and the third Monday of the month, we're going to keep unpacking this. So we just talked about the ACICs, the CSOCs, right? All these alphabet soup. So now we're going to talk about another component of data-informed community-focused policing, and that's the community safety partnerships. And that has been very controversial since it started, but in the last few days, there's been a lot going on. So Akil, and then I have a question, Akil, after you're done, was specifically related to CSP.
Cool. Yeah, so my name is Akil. I'm part of the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition as well. And Yeah, so this particular program, CSP, again, it stands for Community Safety Partnership, and it's being presented right now as a sort of response to these uprisings around the murders of Black people by the police. But in actuality, this program has been around for a decade, and it's been expanding for a decade. And LAPD first started this program in it's targeting housing projects, and it started with basically influx of nonprofit money and partnerships. So it started with HACLA, the Housing Authority. I can't remember what the whole acronym stands for. And then it's also received a lot of funding from the Balmer Group, which is a supposedly philanthropic organization that is run by the CEO, ex-CEO of Microsoft, and also the Weingart Foundation, which has Steve Soberoff on its board. So who is part of the police commission as well. So there's a lot of basically partnerships with nonprofits, not only the level of funding, but the essence of the program is that it takes a community that it deems suspicious in its entirety, tries to basically create, and this is a counterinsurgency tactic, a way to embed police into the community through a variety of means, including some that may seem innocuous. And then it also obtains a sort of rubber stamp through the form of bullshit anti-bias trainings by complicit nonprofits as well. So basically the police enter the community, they do all these different types of so-called, non-policing activities, youth programs, and then they also are partnering with GRID, the Mayor's Gang Reduction and Youth Development Office or organization. And basically the whole point is we have to remember that surveillance is not just an exotic thing that has to do with high tech, but every cop that's in the community is also surveilling constantly, even when they're playing soccer with somebody.
Yep.
So it's a method of basically, and it's also a method of strangling a community's need for resources in exchange for police. So when a community is in dire need of resources because it's been subjected to austerity, etc., it's been subjected through economic siege, and then the police is saying, okay, these much needed resources, you'll get them actually through the police budget. They'll actually go to cops' salaries, but the cops will go into the community, and don't worry, they did a training. And so this is a very insidious program that is trying to basically expand policing under the guise of it being rubber stamped by the community. Again, who is the community involved in this? And then the other part of this that's very important is that it's being also rubber stamped by academia. So they're touting. Sorry, just wanted to remind people to mute if they're unmuted. Thank you. So the other part of this is it's being rubber stamped by academia. So the UCLA Luskin School research team headed by Georgia Leap has released a paper supposedly touting the CSP's success, using a ton of junk science and partnering actually specifically with the infamous Jeff Brantingham, who is the UCLA researcher responsible for PredPol, which Stop LAPD Spying successfully made the LAPD retire in shame. So Brantingham continues his complicity with LA policing through the form of these CSPs, UCLA as a whole as well. And I would say that one of the biggest, the big update of the current moment is that yesterday Garcetti touted the fact that he is now turning CSPs, instead of just a program, into its own bureau. So he's basically tying the 10 CSPs that currently exist into one chain of command. And I think that there is a plan to expand even further. Today, and he's also saying that this is going to become the philosophy of the entire department rather than just a program. But we know that this basically is an insidious counterinsurgency tactic that actually doesn't deviate from LAPD's philosophy, but actually is just basically trying to find a way to lend it false credibility. And I think Hamid can talk a little bit more about what happened this morning at the police commission when the commission voted to accept $500,000 of Balmer Group money for 2 new CSPs funneled through the police foundation. Also, feel free to fill in any holes that I left out.
No, thank you for covering it. So today, and it was interesting that out of the $500,000, only 25% or even a couple percentages less than that was going to go to community needs. The rest of the $375,000 was going to cover payroll for officers. So I think that clearly indicates as to what the role, like with this whole BS talk about defunding and scaling back on funding, this is how money circles back through this as well. And then, of course, the private funding is running out in September. So now, like everything else, it's going to be coming out of the community's monies. They are now talking about that this program is going to be funded by the COPS office, which is a Department of Justice office in Washington, D.C., community-oriented policing section of DOJ, with a whole lot of money. They have also created a whole bureau and made Amada Tengridis, and promoted Amada from captain to a deputy chief. If folks may remember, Tengridis was an officer, still an officer, is a deputy chief at LAPD, who is infamous about the gang policing in South Central Los Angeles and Newton and 77th and other places. His partner, Amada Tengridis, is also now was promoted to deputy chief, and then both that couple, just were invited by Obama at Obama's State of the Union address in 2015 as a model of policing. And it's interesting, that whole show and tell, because he's white and she's a black woman, so that whole interracial connection and working together and working with the kids in South Central. So yeah, it's moving pretty fast, and they're looking to expand it more as well. So, but the community came out very strong. There were over 400 messages that were sent to them. Like there were 40 speakers. Everybody, maybe 5% or so were in favor. Everybody basically talked about it, and people grounded it as an occupying army's tactics of counterinsurgency and surveillance and all of that. So yeah.
Do you mind if I add a couple things really quick as well?
Sure.
One is that another tactic that what they call the LAPC Fails Coalition had yesterday was a tweet storm, calling out not only the program but the deep what do you call it, conflicts of interest of having not only so the Weingart Foundation donated to Shane Goldsmith's organization Liberty Hill. Then there's the fact that Soberov sits on the Weingart Foundation board, and then not only so did they have this tweet storm. One thing that I wanted to specifically say about the program as well that I forgot to say earlier is that it also folds in a lot of classic tactics of broken windows too. In a evaluation study of the CSP, one group, I think it was the Urban Institute, but I can check, explicitly said that they were targeting loitering, parking tickets, basically, and so-called quality of life infractions, basically very minor crimes that we know will very disproportionately impact unhoused people the most. And they also have a specific program called Neighborhood Watch, which is basically encouraging certain people in the community to become snitches. So basically you fold in a lot of different things that are very classic counterinsurgency tactics into this program. So I wanted to add those two things as well.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Hamid and Shakir. So I wanted to, again, pause and...
Akil.
Oh, sorry, Akil. Sorry.
Just.
It's okay.
My problem. Okay. So I wanted to pause again and see if there's any questions. And I do have one question, so if you want to type it in the chat or raise your hand, we can unmute you. But Vivan, who I believe this is the Vivan that volunteered with the coalition and had a residency with us for some times, is asking, is there any way to know what organizations are involved in CSP outside of LAPD's public records? I remember when we were researching HACLA, stalker state compliance, it was nearly impossible to find the extent of complicity, particularly what smaller organizations share what data and were forced to rely on what they are allowed rather than what they are doing. Is there any way to find this? So is there any way to find out what other smaller groups are involved?
Yes, some are stated, like the Watts Gang Task Force, and of course the Urban Peace Institute and the Advancement Project, and UCLA and the Luskin School as well. So these are just sort of the surface level pieces too. But as it expands, Vivan, I think it'll be, and I'm going to pass it on to Akhil to see what he thinks. Like, you know, it'll be instructive to file a public records, but once it moves a little bit, maybe towards the end of the year, get a better picture of, particularly when the private funding runs out. It'll be interesting to see that which other organizations are get involved in
I think grid is going to be a very important part of this too. Grid basically, in a philosophy that is very similar to some of the programs that stop LAPD spying coalition fights, such as countering violent extremism. It basically, starting from the standpoint of assuming somebody's suspicion, it seeks to basically use risk assessment tools and to provide off-ramps to people that it believes to be at risk of joining a gang. And in the form of social services, but it's not only stigmatizing, you know, just by that first notion of suspicion, but we don't really know when this is such a close partnership with the police, at what point do they call up the phone and then refer somebody for law enforcement so-called interventions, you know? So I would say that we have to be a little bit wary of all of these programs that are providing services so-called as an alternative to criminalizing when they're openly saying that they're doing it in partnership with the LAPD. You don't provide alternatives to policing in partnership with the LAPD because they have one purpose. Anyway, that's my attitude.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about that as well, Akhil, is that Centro del Pueblo in Echo Park works closely with GRID, and Sandra Figueroa sits on the board of the police commissioners. So, so there you see a nonprofit already working with GRID that will probably be working with CSP, so that data will also be kind of funneled through the nonprofit with GRID and back to LAPD. So are there any other questions or comments about CSP that folks wanted to dive into or talk about a little bit? And again, I'm going to make the pitch. If you want to be involved, we're having the meetings the first Monday and third Monday of the month. As you can see, there's so much that we have to talk about, so much that we have to integrate and kind of not only build our own knowledge, so we build that power and we know what we're fighting and then we're able to dismantle it. So again, if you want to join, just drop your email in the chat. I don't think right now anybody's by phone, but if you are on phone, 562-230-4578, and just text us and we'd love to loop you in. There's a great group that's doing a lot of this research. And we, you know, like I said, if you feel very new at this too and you still want to study, we're having our webinar on Thursday that's going to help go through some of the basics of surveillance so that we can again build our knowledge and be able to participate more. So, so I think right now, I think what's interesting is that we went through kind of a lot of the ways that we're building power and we're building our knowledge. And, you know, and we need to talk about now how we fight back and why we're so grounded in abolition, what abolition means to the coalition, because abolition is becoming very, you know, a word that's being said a lot. but people are really coming at it from very different angles. I think having that very clear analysis that we are to dismantle, we are not looking to do anything else besides dismantle. I wanted to bring on my colleague Shakir to kind of talk about what we call surveillance bureaucracy, because right now there's a lot of moves that are going on through academia, through nonprofits, where they're trying to shape their tactic as abolitionists, but truly it's not an abolitionist tactic.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. So yeah, I'm going to talk generally about the coalition's kind of work on what Jamie said, surveillance bureaucracy, which is a kind of a term that we came up with more recently, but the work that it covers stretches back a lot longer. And what we call surveillance bureaucracy is basically this kind of paradigm for, or just like way of thinking about how to deal with surveillance or respond to surveillance, or really like respond to criticism of surveillance by the police. That and the idea is that, okay, the surveillance exists, and that what we should do in response to it is come up with like kind of rules and criteria and disclosure requirements and transparency requirements, basically a bunch of paperwork, as the way to govern and regulate surveillance. As Jamie said, you know, our commitment is obviously we're committed to dismantling surveillance systems on the road to abolishing policing and building everything that's necessary to have a world without police. What we see as these laws or reforms that are all about creating new kind of paperwork and bureaucracy for surveillance goes in the opposite direction of, instead of actually breaking down these systems and getting rid of them, it creates like more of this kind of infrastructure around the police state of all these rules that police have to comply with and that police have to write reports on. And then they, you know, police will hire a bunch of lawyers and bureaucrats to work on those, or that police will then use those rules and laws that they come to know really well to introduce new forms of surveillance. And then they can say, oh, well, we're doing facial recognition or whatever, but we introduced this via, we use the process of the bureaucratic process that was created. And that process, we ticked off all the boxes that were part of that. We made sure we've been transparent, we've collected public input. This gives police kind of a claim of legitimacy over their violence. So we've been seeing, the reason that this is an important thing to focus on now is because we've been seeing, you know, this moment of mass uprising and rebellion against policing, when so many people are turning to radical demands about what the answer is to police violence, and that's defunding police, that's abolishing police, that's dismantling police systems. We're seeing this reform pop up as a thing that politicians can kind of quickly embrace as, oh, okay, well, we're doing this in response. It's you know, similar to the CSP announcement yesterday. It's something that police can announce as an example of reform, or as an example of new requirements that they have to follow. But in reality, it's streamlining surveillance and legitimizing surveillance and kind of making surveillance harder to dismantle and to challenge. So around this work, we've the history of this. As I said, the term is something we've only started. Surveillance bureaucracy is a term we've only started using more recently. But in the past, there's been efforts to enact laws like that in Los Angeles and across the state that would basically require or create these kind of procedures that if police want to introduce new forms of surveillance, they have to go through these procedures, and then they can go ahead and do it. So in LA, in 2015 and 2017, there was efforts led mainly by the local ACLU chapter to introduce these laws through the city council to, you know, facilitate this kind of introduction of surveillance from LAPD. The coalition fought those back, and then a similar effort statewide we fought back. The reason, as I said, these are kind of coming back now, and recently in New York City, the city council there passed a law like this called the Post Act. Basically, that is one of these kind of surveillance transparency laws, and what it requires is for police to create impact and use reports about their surveillance and to post them on their website where people can comment. And that's kind of being touted and celebrated by police reformers, legal nonprofits, by kind of politicians who, facing all this pressure, need to be able to declare victory over something, being touted as like a big win. We've gotten NYPD to, they're going to have to disclose what kind of surveillance, make certain reports about their use of surveillance. And that's either being kind of celebrated as either a big win or, okay, this is an important step towards on the path to getting rid of these systems. And the idea there being, oh, we don't actually know the harm of, we don't know how these systems, what these systems are and what their harm is. We don't know what their impact is. And it's only through transparency that we'll be able to dismantle that. The coalition put out kind of an analysis of why we think that logic is wrong, that we think police surveillance and police violence is transparent, that we experience it in our lives. We see the harm of it. We see how it shows up. We see how it results in killing people. We've been talking through this whole meeting of some of the efforts that we have to organize around that. But more importantly, just that these kinds of laws shift kind of power away from the community, put it in the hands of these elite processes that these processes kind of serve to expand policing over time. So we responded, we put out that statement, and we've been kind of building up a campaign around the country to oppose similar, to oppose kind of laws like that, and instead to help people organize towards it's true that there's this momentum now, and there's all this possibility potentially of getting your local legislators to kind of to work towards dismantling police in a way that might not have existed before. And that if we're going to harness that energy to pass legislation, that legislation should be banning things. It should be banning predictive policing. It should be banning gang databases. It should be banning facial recognition. And those are all things that we know about. Those are all, like, when the proponents of the Post Act and some of these other laws say, oh, we can't really get rid of these things until we have forced police to write reports about them. That's wrong, because we know that the gang database, that it exists. We know the harm that it causes. We might not know all of the ways it's being used, but the fact is we know enough to demand that it doesn't exist. We know enough to say that it's harmful and that it doesn't serve our communities and that we need to get rid of it. And if anything, getting into this game with police of, okay, yeah, they'll write a report about it, and the report will obviously characterize the gang database or their facial recognition systems or their use of Palantir or whatever it is in the terms that are designed as carefully as possible to comply with the law and to present this certain picture of it, rather than the community sets the agenda and says, yeah, we might not know every single detail about the gang database, but we know enough that we want to get rid of that we're organizing to abolish it. So since we put out that statement and we're kind of working, I mean, one interesting thing was when we started doing that, the coalition got a lot of kind of pushback from advocates in New York and advocates around the country asking, why are you calling out this legislation all the way in New York? Like, what business is this of yours? You're a local organization. Why are you organizing against this thing on the other side of the country? And our response was, because we know that the police reformers and that the whole legal and kind of corporate infrastructure that exists around this stuff is national, and so we need to organize on that level too, and recognize that what happens in New York, especially New York being the NYPD being one of the most well-funded and kind of cutting edge institutions of oppression in the country, obviously what they do is going to be copied and adopted across the country. And sure enough, just yesterday, the LA Times published an op-ed from a sociology professor who teaches at the University of Texas, where she is writing about the law in New York and saying that Los Angeles should follow suit, and that her argument is very much couched in the rebellion and the protests, saying, oh, there's protests going on to call for defunding police, dismantling police, abolishing police. Here's one way they should do that. They should pass these laws to require transparency, just like in New York. So just as we've kind of been warning about, that New York example is now being, that example is being cited to say it should happen here. So we've the author of that op-ed actually is someone who the coalition has been following for a very long time, because her academic research was based on her name is Sarah Brain. She worked for 2.5 years embedded within the LAPD in kind of a field work within the police department, and has written a book that's coming out this fall about predictive policing that's kind of very much based on that that internal perspective that the police have, and that's showing up in the kind of advocacy that she's doing, saying that, okay, yeah, what we need to, the solution to police surveillance and violence, the answer is not what communities are demanding. It's actually saying communities, the op-ed is very much framed around that communities are missing this reform, that this reform of requiring kind of transparency and bureaucracy for surveillance. So that's just an example of how that work is coming to LA. And it's kind of, compared to some of the other stuff we've been talking about today, is a little more theoretical and a little more abstract. It's, for one, it's about these like ordinances and laws that are not the technology themselves, they're not the surveillance, they're not the weapons themselves, but they're basically the legal cover for them. And they're the legal kind of cover for creating new forms of these technologies and new forms of weapons and harm that we'll have to dismantle in the future. So that's why we're kind of taking on this fight and trying to name the different legal reformers, nonprofits, academics who serve in this role constantly of especially when there's moments of uprising and public kind of criticism of police, who serve in this role of helping police adapt to that criticism, of saying, oh, okay, yeah, people are calling to demand to defund and dismantle police. Instead, why don't we just start doing this kind of small tweak of we'll write surveillance, we'll write impact reports. And that kind of makes policing more responsive to criticism, not actually responsive, but just kind of shifting and evolving and rebuilding itself and becoming more oppressive over time. So that's that's kind of how we think about that. Jamie and Hamid, if you want to add to that.
Oh, that was great.
That was great. You covered it well. I mean, it's just the one thing that we've always said, that that this is the process. Anytime you see any ordinance or legislation move, it's about legitimizing surveillance. It's about acknowledging that this should even exist. So let's do it in this way. So yeah, we reject that notion on a basic level. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to transition in a minute, but there was one other comment from Pierre that said GRID may be integrated into the youth development department that the city of LA is proposing to develop. But there is definitely resistance internally because of their ongoing deep-rooted relationship with LAPD. Would be great to evaluate these issues and concerns at the Youth Development Task Force. GRID will be asked to present to the Youth Development Task Force, so it should be interesting to hear how they would respond to it.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Oh, and potentially be dissolved by the YDD. So looking to dissolve the GRID program. So,
can I just make a quick comment, Jamie, just real quickly? Sure. I think it's also very interesting, and that how the LAPD is claiming that they are done with the gang databases and gang injunctions, but on the flip side, how this sort of different style of policing, this network is being laid out. So of course, GRID was a key and part of the gang injunctions and databases, but the reconfiguration of policing is going to be very interesting as we see this whole surveillance apparatus expand and the social network analysis expand. So yeah, thank you.
So we're going to shift a little bit right now. I don't see any questions in the chat, so thank you so much. And again, for folks that want to get involved in any of this work that we just reviewed, we meet again Monday, the first Monday, the third Monday of the month at 6 p.m. So just send your email our way and we'd love to get you involved. But another thing that's been going on in LA is a lot of talk around budget. And the coalition also we have tons of meetings. If you're ever lonely, come find a meeting. We are here. But we have another group that's meeting every Sunday, and I believe at 4 p.m. And this group is getting into the nitty-gritty of the budget. You know, there's been a lot of discussion around the general funds, but LAPD doesn't just receive money from the general funds. As Akil was speaking about with CSP, there's a lot of private donated money that's going into LAPD. They have special funds that they take from the city. They have budget stabilization funds, reserve funds, grants. Today they had the supplemental police account expenditure where they received another 1.5 million. So this group is looking at really digging deep and really understanding more about the budget, because it's not just the general funds. There's a whole just sea of money that LAPD is receiving. So I'm going to pass it to Sophie, and Sophie's going to kind of let us know what this working group is doing.
Well, thanks, Jamie. And unlike the first working group that was talking, we just have a 668-page budget document that has a lot of line items and proposals. So I don't have fun map graphics to show everyone, but we are currently working on a zine and a graphic to kind of break down some of what we've been talking about in this group, which covers budget and goes a little bit beyond budget as well, of course. So hopefully by the next meeting or the one after that, we'll have some pretty pictures that y'all can look at instead of our faces. But a very quick introduction. I'm Sophie. I'm a member of Free Radicals. We're an activist collective that works at the intersection of science and social justice, kind of with a critical lens on science and technology. And our LA chapter has been collaborating with Stop LAPD Spying Coalition since around 2018, working on the fight against predpol, and then more recently on the algorithmic ecology framework, which hopefully most of the folks on this call have seen. It's an abolitionist communication tool and organizing tool for dismantling different algorithms. And we built that out of the fight against predpol. So I'm gonna try and make this quick since I know it's already almost 7:40, but just wanted to give you a little bit of an update and some insight into what we've been working on with regards to the LAPD budget and the larger city budget. So one of the things that Hamid and the coalition always say is that the budget is ultimately a reflection of the city's priorities, right? So I'm sure it's clear to everyone who's on this call who is familiar with the recent budget conversations around the city asking for them to defund the police, and their responses to that the city's priorities continue to be to surveil and harm their own citizens and community members through the LAPD. So just as the other working group is kind of doing this deep dive into the documents they've received through PRAs on the architecture of surveillance, on laser and predpol density maps, we've also been doing this kind of deep dive into the LAPD budget, which, as you might expect, also involves a bunch of other subcategories, and I'll go into that a little bit later. But just to kind of get us situated, so based on the original proposed budget, LAPD's general fund proposed budget for this coming fiscal year 20 to 21 was about $1.9 billion in direct costs, right, compared to about $1.7 billion in the previous fiscal year, which is originally an increase of around $229 million. But after the proposed $150 million cut was taken out of that increase, they're quote unquote only increasing the LAPD budget by 123 million now, right? And of course, keep in mind that this is happening as department budgets for other city departments are being cut, right? One of the things that we actually talked about at our most recent meeting with Tess, who is someone who works in finance and was able to give us some insight into how budgets work in general, and also who had looked a little bit into the city budgets of other departments, is that other departments are and had been routinely audited, and the LAPD, as you might expect, has not had a full audit in basically as far as we can see. They had a partial audit in 2018, and the documents from that are one of the things that we're going to be looking more into. So if you're interested in looking through audits of city budgets or any of these kinds of finance documents, please join us on Sundays. But it's a lot more fun than just looking through documents on your own. And yeah, so one of the sections that wasn't cut from this 150 million cut was the funding for technology. So specifically in relation to what we've been talking about with this architecture of surveillance, with surveillance bureaucracy, everything else that the coalition is working on right now. And this includes the LAPD's record management system. So the folks who, I think it was mainly Koretz who had pushed forward this amendment to the original cuts, which were for over 200 million. He basically said that these technologies are what make the LAPD more efficient, right? More cost effective, more able to do what they're trying to do, which is the opposite of the whole point of defunding the LAPD. And so these technology cuts were actually removed from the final version of the cuts to LAPD. And the record management system is part of that, part of the original proposed cuts, which were then not actually cut. So as Jamie talked about, right, the records management system is a huge part of what makes possible the consolidation of data that goes to CSOCs, includes things like field card data, and basically all of the stuff that makes it possible for the LAPD to continue to surveil communities and also pass that information around with other departments as well. And yeah, so that's one of the things that happened with those cuts, which weren't actually, of course, cuts, but just a decrease on the increase. So we've also been looking through the entire 688-page 2020 to 2021 proposed LAPD budget, and then also supplementing that with the mayor's blue books, which include data from the proposed budget for all of the other departments as well. And when we started this a few months ago, we started by breaking down the components of the budget into 4 broad categories. So we looked at staffing, we looked at surveillance, houselessness, and community policing / community safety partnerships. But as we were doing this, we started by just looking through, you know, each of the proposed changes to the budget and then what their justification was. We pretty quickly realized that this enormous, as I said, 668-page budget document was only the proposed changes for this coming year. So that was only the like 150 million or so in additional funding that they were requesting. So we actually don't have public access to the base budget, which is that other like 1.5 or so million that is being kind of rolled over, or is what's being built on with this addition this year, right? So that's just over $1 billion of money that we don't have line items for, that nobody knows what is being paid for. And I think Hamid actually just got a response back from the commission today that was super unhelpful. So we requested the base budget and they just sent us the mayor's blue book and the proposed budget changes. Or I think possibly they sent us last year's accepted proposed budget changes, which again only includes the increase for last year, but not the full base budget. So that's one thing that we're kind of working on right now, is assuming with this response from the commission, we're gonna probably have to file a PRA to be able to get access to that base budget, to all of those line items. And yeah, so a couple of the things that we're working on right now, it's kind of split into about like 5 different projects we have going on right now. The first is we're building out a list of scaffolding questions to shape a future primer on the LAPD budget once we have this full base budget and we're able to kind of answer these questions. So some of the questions that we currently have, some of them are more general, some of them are more specific to those 4 categories that I mentioned earlier. So for example, something like and this is like a question that we can't figure out just from the proposed budget increase. We need the full base budget to understand these things. So what are all of the technological and digital programs of surveillance that the LAPD currently has in use? So that includes both these kinds of explicit surveillance tools, like the license plate readers, like all of the things that Jamie mentioned that are part of this architecture surveillance, as well as the mundane tools that we talked about in a recent piece where we kind of called out Microsoft, right, who's supplying, both contracting with LAPD to create programs specifically for them, but also selling them things like Microsoft Office, like these very mundane, quote unquote, mundane tools and technologies that still allow the LAPD to do what they're doing. So yeah, so we're building out these kinds of scaffolding questions. If you have any questions about the LAPD budget that you would like to add to this, please let us know. You can join us on at these Sunday meetings, which are at 4 p.m., or we can always take emails or any questions and add them to these docs that we have and then report back at these Tuesday meetings. So that's the first kind of project that we have going on. The second is we're working on, as I mentioned, a zine and a graphic that kind of dives into this idea of what does progress or a win actually look like. So actually kind of pretty related to what Shakir was talking about with surveillance bureaucracy, right? Let me see. Yeah, so what would actual redistribution of resources to meet community needs look like? And what are the things that are being proposed that don't actually do that right now? So this is going to be a graphic based on the Malcolm X quote about if you drive a knife into your back and you pull it out, you drive it in 9 inches and you pull it out 6 inches, then you haven't even gotten to the point where you're pulling it out all the way, much less to healing the wound, right? And in this case with LAPD, people are saying that this reduction in the increase is a win, but actually you haven't even started pulling the knife out. You've actually just said we were going to push it in 3 inches, but we actually only pushed it in 2 more. So trying to figure out a way to kind of convey that this isn't necessarily a win and that there's more work that we have to do to push for actual defunding and abolition of the police in LA. So that's kind of the graphic idea, and then the zine will go more in depth into asking these kinds of critical questions around when the LAPD says that they're going to put more funding into community programs like CSP, that's not actually a win. And if they say, okay, well then instead of that, we'll put it into social work in the city. Well, what are the ways that social services in the city are still connected to this architecture of surveillance, still connected to collecting data that goes back into the LAPD, that goes back into surveilling and policing and harming communities. And then even extending to things like if you increase funding for schools, what are the ways that schools are also sites of enclosure, also sites of surveillance? And then if you even go beyond outside of the city itself and donate money to nonprofits, as has been brought up a couple of different times already, how are nonprofits also complicit in this kind of nonprofit, city, government, industrial, military complex as well? And then I think also it was also mentioned earlier by Jamie that LAPD doesn't just get money from the city's general fund. They also get money from a number of special funds related to what Akil was talking about this morning with the CSP donation. They get money through donations that sometimes just goes to the police commission, sometimes just goes to city council, isn't counted in the actual LAPD budget. And then one other thing also is that a lot of the LAPD budget is covered in other city departments. So for example, if the LA Public Library System wants to hire a number of LAPD officers, those officers are counted under the library's budget. So one thing that we're trying to do right now is look through other department budgets to find other ways that the LAPD is receiving money that's not being counted in the LAPD's formal budget. So that was a little bit of a tangent, but that's kind of the general structure of what we're thinking about for this zine right now. So that's the graphic and the zine. That's the kind of second category stuff. And then really quickly, the other things we're looking to do are, again, filing a few PRAs to find out where those other forms of funding are coming from, because a lot of it isn't publicly available right now. And then also to find information on conversations between Chief Moore and the mayor on those budget cuts, right? So did the mayor consult and did different city council members consult with the police chief on where they wanted cuts to be taken before they made those cuts? And then we're also analyzing documents like these grant documents. And then also, I mentioned briefly the past incomplete audits of the LAPD to understand how their budget is built and how it's changed over the years. The final thing that I will mention here, and then Jamie, Hamid, anyone else who's part of that can also jump in as well, is that we're also going to be working on creating diagrams to show the increase in LAPD's tech budget in particular over the years since 2000 and around the beginning of the implementation of SAR, or suspicious activity reporting. So those are just a couple of the things that this group is working on. Again, as Jenny mentioned, we meet on Sundays at 4 p.m. If you can make it, that's great. We definitely need more hands on deck, especially as we're compiling, and some of our members are pulling together a lot of these documents that are publicly available. So we do need more eyes to go through them. And yeah, if you can't make those meetings, as with the other group, we will still, of course, be reporting back at these Tuesday, fourth Tuesday meetings. So I think that's most of the stuff that I had to talk about. And yeah, if anyone else has questions or things to add.
So any questions from folks? Because we're going to transition back to some amazing artwork that we're doing. We wanted to showcase our zine from the beginning again, and there's a short video, music video while we say goodbye, but I wanted to see if anybody had any questions. And again, we've got tons of places to plug in, works with everyone's schedule. So
there was a
hopefully.
comment about grants. So yes, absolutely, about the federal grants that they get, the Urban Area Security Initiative grants that they get. So that whole money comes out to at least about, if not $200 million, but quite a bit. And through donations from Police Foundation, you're looking at over $125 million chunk of money that is there as well. So yeah. And then the asset forfeiture, the items that they sell, based upon and what's interesting is that the asset forfeiture is such a racket that it doesn't have to be that you have to wait for convictions and all of that. You just, once you may do a raid, so it's an incentive to go and raid people's homes under the pretext of drug running and gun running and things like that.
Well, so wanted to see Sunshine. Are you able to pull up the zine again so that we can show folks the zine? Shakir, if you wanted to jump in and let folks know how this all relates to surveillance bureaucracy. We'd love to end with some art to show you what we've created to, share knowledge and to build power. And we have a music video too we want to share. So if you want to hang out a little bit, and we're going to pull up the zine.
Go ahead, Sunshine. Your co-host, so you could go to screen share if you want, and unmute yourself.
Give me a second. I don't have the computer anymore, but I'm pretty sure I can do it on my phone.
Oh, okay.
I could try to pull it up too.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that'd be really great.
It's not the slideshow form that Sunshine had earlier, which was cool, but. Can you see this?
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, we put together, as I was saying, we put out kind of a statement and an analysis of the surveillance bureaucracy laws, and that was kind of a dense, long document about a bunch of legal statutes. So we also wanted to put out another document that was just a little more accessible and kind of really bringing this analysis, really trying to boil down the analysis to its key points. So we put together the zine that's called Fuck 12 Reasons to Reject Surveillance Bureaucracy, and illustrated by our friends at Baby Anarchists. And so, yeah, so this is the zine. It's taking from the points that's in the longer statement, but as I said, kind of trying to present them more creatively and accessibly. The zine exists both in, this is like a digital form of it, and then there's also another PDF, and I can share these links in the chat, that that is meant for being able to print and assemble into a physical zine. So you should do that and share it with everyone you know, share it with children, just get this word out there.
Nice. Thanks for plugging that again, Shakir. That was such a great way to get across, you know, all this dense information. So I want to thank everybody again for joining us. And, you know, we have a lot of work to do. And again, just want to leave you with some inspiring art and music. And we'll see you again next Tuesday for our next coalition meeting on looking at the intersection of gender and sexuality and surveillance. So have a beautiful night.
What if white supremacy was guided by a star that seen its peak, now we feel it dying off. To be alive, to see it all. The final fall of the white wall. What if white supremacy was guided by a star that seen its peak, now we feel it dying off. To be alive, to see it all. The final fall of the white wall. Yeah, you wrote a universal contract. Get the fuck out of here, you know where their doors at. All you did was rain ash and tell your worshipers their jealousy was back. And the only thing worse than being there was being black. The cowards you attract, no money give you life, so they hoarding all your gold. Then send police for overseeing what you stole. All this had to come to pass, I don't try to understand. The record you command, sleight of hand is tribalism with the violence in the fans. Too numb to feel a natural connection to the land. Your murderers and conquerors perverted holy symbols and converted them to swastikas. Everything you make is partial, insecure and paranoid and patriarchal. Your medicine is harmful, your history against. Only legitimate when you come out the best. This energy is crazy, I can feel it from the sky. What a time to be alive, we gonna see you die. On behalf of Star Sea Coalition and relatives separated from the old traditions, we gonna play long game, every day is hard. All moves made accelerated by the earth. Their cities will dissolve, their militias will collapse. Their sons won't believe them, their daughters will attract. Imagine what we'll feel when you dead on your back. If a hen can lay an egg with its dead, take those scraps. Here it is. Fuck out of here. Good riddance. Speed of light. Don't fear. Beyond desire. Into this mystery of mystery. Gate. You be alive to see it all. What if white supremacy was guided by a star that seen its peak, now we feel it dying off. To be alive, to see it all. The final fall of the white dwarf. I've been waiting my whole damn life for this moment. Training my whole damn life for this day. Waiting my whole damn life for this moment. Training my whole damn life for this day. Black children of the future rejoice. You pounded the heavens with the sound of your voice. You shook it loose now, watch it cry. Let it fall down, let it die. But we get better, it's gonna get worse. So many levels, it's a thick curse. But to be alive is to see it all. The final fall of the white wall.
And that was Sam Patton, who's also doing a creative director residency. He's a recording artist and hip hop artist, and does his. So, anyways, with that, have a good night. Enjoy yourself. Hopefully, we'll see some of you on Surveillance 101, and we'll do it.
Take care, everyone.
Night.